couple years ago, I started a challenge. I challenged myself to watch 100 horror movies for 100 days straight to get over the fear of horror movies. One day I just started this challenge out of the blue. Back then, if I watch a horror movie, then I would get scared for a couple days straight or a week. So I was thinking like, if I'm gonna get scared for a week after watching just one horror movie, I might as well just watch one horror movie for a day and for 100 days straight. So the ROI sounds better. So today we're gonna review that 60 horror movies out of the 100. Well, how come it's not 100? Well, that's because, you see, I reached my goal of not being afraid of horror movies after watching like 25 of them. And if I reach my goal, then I don't see a point to complete the list. And that's how I started to drag on the challenge. So on and off, I've watched for like around 60 films, and that's why we're only reviewing 60 horror movies today. Let's get into it. When I review all 60 movies, I am trying to keep it spoiler free so you can enjoy the movies as you watch them yourself. I will try to keep the reviews short for each of them, but for some of the movies that I love, I will give them a longer review. So the review is gonna go from my top 5 recommendations to great horror movies, and then to somewhat okay horror movies, and then to the bottom of the barrel, which is terrible horror movies. So if you want to check out horror movie reviews from different ranks, you can just go to the timestamp. I need to have my list here because it's a really long list. I have to look at it just so I don't miss any films here. Please keep in mind that this recommendation list is based on my preference, so if you don't like it or you disagree with me, that's fine. And yeah, let's get into it. Listen, if I can only recommend one horror movie, that would be Shudder. Shudder is definitely the top choice that I would recommend to anyone who's looking to get into horror films. This film is from Thailand and it was released in 2004. There's an American version remake of it, and it was released in 2008. So when you search up this movie on Google, please remember to type in Shudder 2004 Thailand. Otherwise, the search result will show you the American remake, which I don't really like remake of any kind. I always think the original one is better. The reason why I chose Shudder to be my top choice of all time is because they nail every aspect of what makes up a good horror movie. It has the typical jump scare, it has slow emotional scenes, it has eerie scenes, it has an excellent sound engineering to build up the unsettling emotion. It has a good backstory for the ghost, and it has the perfect plot twist at the end of the film, and it ties every little details from the beginning of the movie to the end. Like, it works perfectly. And that's why I would give this film a 10 out of 10. The American remake of this film was directed by a Japanese director named Masayuki Ochiai. That in itself is funny enough. It's like the American producers, they don't even trust the American filmmakers' ability to convert an Asian horror film to an American horror film correctly. Which is true, they don't do a good job, and that's why they chose to hire an Asian director. Masayuki also directed Ju-on the Final Curse and Ju-on the Beginning of the End. I will talk about these two films later on when we get to it. The second film on my top 5 recommendations would be the Conjuring series. And I'm only referring to the first 2 Conjuring films because I haven't watched the third one yet. From what I've heard, the third one is not as good as the first 2. If there's a peak for American horror films, then the Conjuring series would take the crown. And of course, the Conjuring series that I'm referring to are only the first 2 films. There are a lot of films in the Conjuring universe. It's kind of like, you know, the MCU. The first 2 Conjuring films are highly recommended by any horror movie lovers, and I think that can say a lot about the quality of these 2 films. What intrigued me to watch them was the fact that they are based on real life events. The Conjuring films have a lot of jump scare, but I love the way the filmmakers make it to look not cheap. If you overuse jump scare, it makes the film look like they're trying to get the scare effect of people just by jumping on them. Another thing that I love about the Conjuring films was that not only do they tell the horror events, they also put effort into illustrating the relationship between the Warrens. And on that point, they did it perfectly in the second film. I would give the Conjuring series a 10 out of 10. Now let's move on to the third movie on my top 5 recommendations. It is Ju-on the Grudge series. For Ju-on the Grudge series, I would call it the essence, the peak of Japanese horror films. I don't think any Japanese horror film can top that. The series was a huge success back in the day, and it spawned multiple follow-up films and remakes, both American remakes and Japanese remakes. It's a money-making franchise. I wholeheartedly love the first 2 films from this franchise, which is Ju-on the Grudge and Ju-on the Grudge 2. I would totally give these 2 films a 10 out of 10. Why? We're gonna get into that. I think I watched this film very early on when I started this challenge. Maybe it's like on the 16th or the 10th day when I started the challenge. And I do not suggest you to do the same as what I did, because this film can terrify you. Did it scare the shit out of me? Hell yeah. Now, what is it so scary about these 2 films? The ghost in Ju-on the Grudge would kill anyone that do her wrong, or just by association with the victims, or she just kills whoever that walks in her way that she doesn't like it, and she would kill them in any creative ways possible. Gotta love a creative queen. Slay for real. So the real reason why the films are scary is because those haunting scenes, those creepy scenes, they associate with your daily lives. They look like they could happen to you in your regular life, which is why I don't recommend any horror movie beginner to watch this film in the jump. Just listen to me, just don't try it, okay? The filmmakers are very good at taking mundane life elements and turn them into scary scenarios. And they did it so well that they can create the scary effect even when the movie has a warm tone. You don't see that very often in horror movies. You know how the American films, they always have the green, teal, blue, like all those cool tones to make the movie look scary? Well, that doesn't happen often in the Ju-on the Grudge series. They don't need to rely on the cool tones. Also, the sound engineering for the films are perfect. Sometimes when you leave a scene with no soundtrack, will make you tense up more than having a creepy soundtrack playing in the background. I guess this is similar to our fear of the unknown. We are afraid of the silence, knowing we are in a dangerous situation. If you have decided to watch Ju-on, then I would need to let you know that the story is not told in a linear chronological order. The reason for that is because the filmmaker is trying to tell multiple stories in a non-chronological order, and some of those stories are connected. It is definitely challenging to understand this film. And if you want to watch the whole franchise, here's the list of the movies that you want to check out. I listed all of them in order. Ju-on the Beginning of the End and Ju-on the Final Curse are the Japanese remakes of the original Ju-on. Do you remember this guy, Masayuki Ochiai, that we mentioned earlier? Yeah, he's the director for these 2 films. Spoiler alert, I don't think they're good. Now, there's a huge cultural difference between American horror films and Asian horror films. American films focus on scary looks, jump scare, loud noises, and the gore. Whereas in Asian horror films, they focus a lot more on painting the unsettling atmosphere, the normality distortion, and slow creepy scenes. That is particularly true for Japanese horror films. So that's why some of the audience might find American horror films scarier, or vice versa. For me, because I'm a cultural chameleon, I understand both cultures and I love both of them, but I do feel like Japanese horror films are scarier to me. Moving on to number 4 on my top 5 list. The Insidious quadrilogy. Well, it's not really a quadrilogy anymore because they have a 5th film. Why do they still continue this franchise? They should wrap it up on the 4th one. It's a good ending to wrap the whole thing. But you know, Hollywood's gotta make the money. The first and the second ones are great. They are one full circle. I kind of wish they would have stopped at the second one because it's perfect. And when you watch the 3rd and the 4th ones, they look like a stretch on the original story. They're not terrible. They still have decent plots, but they are not as memorable as the first 2. Overall, I would give this entire series, the first 4 films, an 8 out of 10. Because the first 2 are pretty good. The 3rd and 4th, and not so much. Now let's move on to number 5 on my top 5 list, which is the Amityville Horror. This film has a good pacing, great lighting, and sound engineering. It has an excellent plot. The screenwriters give the house a violent massacre backstory to build up the evil spirit image. Also, I would say this film is one of the few films you would see Ryan Reynolds plays a serious character. I would give this film an 8 out of 10. Now that I've introduced my top 5 recommendations to you guys, it's time that I should introduce you to my other highly rated films. Starting with The Shining, a classic horror film which inspired many other horror films and generates a lot of memes. The reason why I didn't put this one in my top 5 is because I prioritize horror films with the traditional ghost, traditional scary looking elements. Shining has ghosts in it, but it's not the traditional ones that I love. When you watch this movie, you can definitely tell many horror elements from other horror movies are inspired by this film. I would give The Shining a 9 out of 10. Next one, Ringu. I dare to say this is the most influential Japanese horror film in the history of J-horror. Its success back in the 90s has swept the entire Asia and Western countries as well. When you think of J-horror, you would think of Sadako from this film or Kayako from Ju-on. The outstanding characteristic of J-horror is depicting eerie atmosphere that creeps you out. There are not a lot of jump scare in this film, and I would say it's almost none. This is actually the first film that I watched when I started this challenge. To be frank, I had a high expectation for this film, and it failed my expectation. Because I heard back in the days people actually die in the theater after watching this film, so I thought, oh shit, this film's gonna be scary. But when I watched it, I feel like it's not as scary. It's creepy, but not scary. Do you know what I'm saying? Maybe it's because it's outdated. You know, this film is from the 90s. It has been more than 20 or 30 years from now. I would give this film a 7.5 out of 10. Honestly, I'm being graceful here to give this score because of its past success. Next one, Hereditary. It is a creepy cult movie, and I listed this one pretty close to the end of my list. Okay, so as I watch more and more horror films when I continue my challenge, I learned how to appreciate horror films that are not traditional horror films. You know, like Ju-on, Conjuring, and Shudder, films like that. The characters in this film spend most of their time grieving the loss of their loved ones, so the whole film is quiet, really quiet, and it has a depressing tone that is suffocating. Also, this one is a slow burn. It gets more and more intense towards the end of the film. It's a 9 out of 10. Next one, Silent Hill. I definitely have watched this film for at least 3 times. In this film, they do not have the traditional ghost, but they do have some other great horror elements. And I really love the story. 9 out of 10. Next one, Malignant. It's pretty good. I mean, the film is directed by James Wan, so of course it's good. Okay, so if it's directed by James Wan, then it's a good film. But if it's produced by James Wan, the quality, it's not as good. The overall story in Malignant is pretty good, and sometimes in some scenes I feel like they're quite comedic, and I love the main character setting. It's pretty interesting if you watch that. You understand what I'm saying. It's an 8 out of 10. Next one, it's Stranger Danger. If you have a scary clown in a horror movie, automatically it makes it a good horror movie. Yeah, you just get good score automatically. The film has a good adventure bonding story about a friend group while they're trying to defeat the clown. And I think that's why I want to give it a high rating, even though in the whole film it's scary, but not most of the time. 8.5 out of 10. Next one, Barbarian. The film is about Airbnb double booking, but the horrors has nothing to associate with the double booking situation, but more about the house. This is a novel idea and I love it. If you think about it, it is kind of scary for us to just live in someone else's house without knowing what's in the house. This kind of horror can actually happen in real life, which I think this makes it a whole lot scarier than the traditional horror films. You know, the ones with ghosts. Humans are a whole lot more terrifying than ghosts. Also, I love how the main female character is smart. Like, most of her action makes sense. She's trapped in the house by situation. She's not dumb. 8 out of 10. Next one, Incantation. This horror film is from Taiwan and it is inspired by a real event. Now, remember, inspired, not based on a real event. There's a huge difference. Inspired by a real event means the filmmakers only took certain elements from the real event. Based on a real event means the filmmakers basically made the whole movie highly similar to the real event. This film is about curse, ritual, and ghost. So if you're the kind of person who believes in curse, then I would suggest you to skip this film because the curse in this film is quite strong. This film definitely took inspiration from Ringu. The plot twist near the end sends shiver down your spine and might anger you to make you want to punch the screen. That scene is the only scene that I skipped when I watched that film. Well, I didn't actually skip the scene. When I watched on my laptop, I put the laptop like 10 meters away from me just so I don't feel the curse. Fine, I was scared. I'm only gonna give this film a 7.5 out of 10 because of the editing skills. It's very choppy. The story timeline is not linear, so you might want to read the description about the mother and the daughter relationship on Wikipedia before you watched it. If it weren't for the editing skills, then I would give it a 8.5 out of 10. I don't think I'll ever watch Incantation again. It's not because it's bad. It's because it's uncomfortable to watch it and the haunting experience is too strong. Next one, Us. It has a novel world setting, excellent symbolism about the US, and an excellent plot twist. Lupita's acting is top notch. If we actually look past the logic of the world setting, then it would be flawless. 7.5 out of 10. Next one, The Skeleton Key. It is an underrated thriller that has a tiny bit of horror in it. It is not scary, and I think it should not market itself as a horror movie, but rather a curse voodoo movie, which is exactly what it's about. But at the time, I just put it in my list without knowing the plot of it. 8.5 out of 10. Next one, Lights Out. This is a good example of taking a simple concept, the fear of the darkness, and make it into a movie. The trailer for this film is simple and to the point. The film itself feels slightly less scary than what the trailer is trying to portray. The director of this film, David Sandberg, has a YouTube channel where he makes short horror films with his wife, Lotta Loston. The channel name is Pony Smashers, and if you are a horror film lover, you should subscribe to him. His original short film, Lights Out, on his channel is perfect. Definitely 10 out of 10. And that film was so good that it went viral on the internet. And this is how he got a movie deal out of this. Overall, I would give this film a 7 out of 10. Next one, The Grudge, the American remake of the original film Ju-on the Grudge. Well, this one is not too bad for an American remake. Even when the American remake hired the same director from Ju-on the Grudge, which is a smart move, I'll give you that. But still, it can never outdo the original. I feel like the filmmakers definitely strained the plot a little bit for this American remake. 7 out of 10. Next one, Ju-on the Curse and Ju-on the Curse 2. Wait, what are these two? Well, Ju-on the Curse is the first film in the Ju-on franchise. They are both short films, each about 17 minutes on their release because they had a huge success in Japan and the director wanted to continue the stories. Hence, we have Ju-on the Grudge. The Grudge is more well known than The Curse. Well, it's because they are well produced and they have American remakes of the original The Grudge. In this film series, Ju-on the Curse, you can learn more about the backstory of the ghost Kayako, which Ju-on the Grudge series do not explain much. Ju-on the Grudge only explains how the curse The Grudge exists in the first place, and by the way, the pacing for the Curse series is so much slower than the Grudge series. I would give this series 7 out of 10. Next one, Oculus. This film is about a pair of siblings who are trying to capture supernatural activities on a camera and destroy the ghost in an ancient mirror. The sister suspects the mirror causes the death of their parents when they were little kids. Karen Gillan plays the sister. She's my favorite actress. If you don't recognize her, maybe you will recognize her. There's only one thing that I don't like about this film, which is pacing. I think it's because the characters spend most of their time trying to capture supernatural activities and they're waiting for those activities to happen. So the pacing feels slow and most of the time I feel like I'm just waiting for scary things to happen. The story is good though. I would give this film 7 out of 10. Next one, The Descent. It's a horror adventure film. This movie should serve as a reminder to not explore scary caves, because there might be monster in the caves. Also, people should stop taking their friends to do dangerous activities when you want to cheer your friends up. That's kind of weird when you want to cheer your friends up and you take them to do really dangerous activities. Like, first of all, this one, and then what is it? The Fall, or is it called Fall? So I would rate this film 8 out of 10. Next one, Carrie from 1976. This film is about school bullying, except the girl they bully has supernatural power. She can do creepy shit. And her mom is creepy as well. The blood pouring down from Carrie's head and her expressions are the best scenes in the entire film. 7 out of 10. Next one, Orphan. This film is about a strange orphan who does psychotic shit and has creepy behavior in her new adopted family. It's more like a psychological thriller rather than horror. But the story is good, and at the time I just gathered as much films as possible, so I put this one on my list. 7 out of 10. Next one, Gonjiam Haunted Asylum. This film is from South Korea. Gonjiam is filmed in a fake documentary style. I think Gonjiam did a pretty good job. There are some downtime in this film. I think that has to do with the style that they're trying to film, well, which is fake documentary style. They did it this way because the filmmakers are trying to recreate what it's like for normal people going into a haunted place to experience paranormal activities. And those activities are not gonna come at you all at once with no break time. There's not gonna be a lot of music, a lot of soundtrack, or sound effects, as the filmmakers want the audience to feel like they are watching the broadcast, or you are one of them in the exploration team. And it is quite suitable because the story is about a bunch of young people going to a haunted hospital and broadcast their exploration on social media. But the downside to that is you don't feel as scary because you're experiencing haunted activities with the characters. So it feels like you're waiting for scary scenes to come up. I would give it 7 out of 10. Alright, that's all the great horror movies that I would recommend. Let's move on to the lower rank, which is horror movies that I would feel like it's just okay, but it's not great. Starting with Veronica. It's a Spanish film inspired by a police record in real life. It's about a girl who got haunted after playing Ouija board, and strange things started to happen to her and her siblings. The story is told mostly in a chronological order, but the pacing is slow. So this girl is supposed to die 3 days after playing the board, but the tension for the time slipping away is not strong. There's no urgency, but I would say the story is good. 6.5 out of 10. Next one, The Exorcist from 1973. This film is another great example aside from Ringu to show you dated editing skills, color grading, and storytelling can have detrimental influence on viewer experience. This film actually has a great reputation, a high score on IMDb, and the story is fine, but it just doesn't cut it for me. Also, I forgot to mention, the special makeup is phenomenal. I tried to watch the second one from this franchise. Oh my god, the pacing in that one is so much slower. I just couldn't finish it. So for this film, I would give it 5 out of 10. Next film, Ouija. This film is not memorable at all, and the plot twist doesn't quite make sense. I mean, it's alright to watch it to pass time. 5 out of 10. Next film, Ringu 2. This is the second sequel to Ringu, but it's not the second film after Ringu. Wait, so what does that mean? You see, before Ringu 2, there's Lassen, which that one was the first sequel to Ringu, the actual second film in the Ringu franchise. But because Lassen got bad reviews, so the director decided to make Ringu 2 to replace Lassen. The film is fine. They have quite similar plot to the first one, which is about saving the sun. And in this film, they're trying to save the sun once again. So overall, the film is fine. Might be good if you have to compare it to Lassen. Lassen is just a dumpster fire, which I'm gonna review it in the very bottom rank of this whole film review. So for Ringu 2, I will give 5 out of 10. Next one, Rain Zero Birthday. Somehow it's called Rain Zero. It's not Ringu Zero. even though it's a Japanese film. Like for the first two, you call it Ringu, Ringu 2, might as well just call it Ringu 0. This one is a prequel to Ringu. This film isn't scary because it's about the backstory of the female ghost Sadako, back when she was a human and she had bad experiences with people. As the audience, you would sympathize with her because of her tragedy. So I quite like this film, even though it's not scary. I would give 6.5 out of 10. Next one, Dark Water. We're gonna talk about the original film from Japan, not the American version remake of it. Of course, there's another American remake, of course. This film is about a single mother moving to an apartment with her daughter, and strange things started to happen because the place is haunted, of course. It's a little bit scary, more like creepy, not that scary. It's just alright. I would give the film a 6 out of 10. Next film, The Grudge 2. This film's starting to go off from the original setting of Ju-on the Grudge. What I hate about this film is that they added unnecessary childhood backstory to the ghost, Kayako, on top of the original backstory. The change doesn't make sense at all. They're trying to demonize Kayako from her childhood. But if you have ever watched Ju-on the Grudge, you know that she became a ghost because of her onnen. It's not because, oh, she had a psycho mother from back when she was a kid. And that whole childhood backstory, it's not from the original Ju-on the Grudge. There are only two things that I love about this film: Edison Chan and the fact that the curse is not regional limited to Japan. So I would give it a 5 out of 10. I would say it's good. Next film, more like next two films because I want to talk about them together. They are Curse of Chucky and The Cult of Chucky. So back when I was looking for horror films, some website they listed them as horror films, so I watched them. They are scary, but I wouldn't consider them as traditional horror films where you see ghosts, stuff like that. I was expecting those, but these two films have a great horror element, which is Chucky, the creepy doll. But Chucky is not like Annabelle type of horror, which is possessed by a demonic presence. Chucky is possessed by a deceased human. So the reason why I rate these two films as, you know, it's okay kind of movies, it's because I feel like they're more comedic type of drama film. They're not exactly horror film. They're not exactly horror films. And because some of the scenes are comedic, I feel like it just takes away the scary effect. So I would rate these two films as 5 out of 10. Next film, The Descent, Part 2. The film is okay, but I don't like the plot setting. So if you have watched the previous film, The Descent, then you would know some character, actually just one character, that character should not be alive in this film, the Part 2 film, from the start. So yeah, I just don't like the plot setting. But aside from that, you'll see pretty much the same plot as the previous film, but it's just slightly dumber. Like the tension is not as strong because you know what's gonna happen, and that just takes away the scary effect. So I would give this film a 6.5 out of 10. Next film, Nope. Just like the title, it's a nope for me. The reason for that is that I'm not an Alien fan, so I'm not into Alien type of movie. The cinematography is great though. When I watched this trailer, I was expecting a lot more scary elements from this film. I thought it's gonna be like one of those traditional horror films, but it's not. Like, okay, it's about aliens. It has some great scenes though, like the monkey and the blood pouring down from the sky. These two scenes are pretty good. Honestly, I was expecting a whole lot more from Jordan Peele, which is the director. He directed Us in Get Out. Get Out is a masterpiece for sure, and you should check it out. So I would rate this film as a 6.5 out of 10. Next one, It, Chapter 2. So this film talks about the same group of kids after they became adults, and the clown still haunted them, and that's why they needed to go back to their hometown to kill this clown. I would say the story is fine, but if you have to compare to the first one, when you are a kid and you're being chased by a clown, it looks scarier. But if you surround a bunch of adults with a clown, it looks odd. There's one thing that I love about this film, which is the little fat kid from the first one. He had a glow up, and when he reunited with the group, he had a romantic relationship with the only girl in the group. And I can see it makes sense because back in the first film, he was the one who wrote the love letter to the girl. It's really nice to see both of them have a happy ending. So I would rate this film as a 6 out of 10. Next film, X. Actually, I watched Pearl before X. Pearl is the prequel to X. So the plot about X is that a bunch of young people who want to make it in the adult entertainment industry, they rented a house in a suburb, I guess. They knew very little about the landlord and definitely didn't know the landlord had a psychotic wife who was super jealous of young people and young looking people particularly. Well, you will find out when you watch Pearl. That film explains why. For X, I feel like it's more like in between thriller and horror. It's definitely not a horror film, so I would give this film as a 5 out of 10. Next film, The Black Phone. I think the best way that I can describe this film is that it's a supernatural child kidnap film. What do you mean supernatural? Well, the room where the child kidnapper keeps the victim, it's haunted. It is haunted by many past victim spirits. And all these spirits, they're trying to help the main character to get out. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I would say this film is a thriller film, but not horror. I guess the reason why they categorize it as horror is because, you know, haunted spirits. Ghost. So if you put it in the category of thriller, I would give it like a solid 7 out of 10. But if you categorize it into horror film, it's a 5 out of 10. It's not scary. Now let's move on to the bottom rank of the horror movies. They are just downright disappointing, bad, poorly made. Starting off, Annabelle. I would say Annabelle, the whole series, I had too high hope. My expectation was too high. For the first Annabelle, the plot is good, you know, it's about a creepy doll who haunts people. But the execution of the story felt so boring. Let me tell you, for the majority of your time, you are only gonna see the doll is playing with the light switch, playing with chairs. Well, I expected more than that. 4.5 out of 10. Next one, Annabelle Creation. This film has a pacing problem. Aside from that, there's also another problem. The main character, that little girl, she's kind of dumb. Okay, she's dumb, not kind of. Her action doesn't make sense. She keeps going back to the haunted room intentionally after seeing paranormal activities that, you know, scare the shit out of her. But she chose to go back to that room. Why? 4 out of 10. Next one, Annabelle Comes Home. It is dumber than the second one in the whole franchise. 3.5 out of 10. Next one, Silent Hill 2. The sequel is unnecessary. 4 out of 10. Next one, The Nun. The ghost nun has a huge potential to be a great character. The backstory of the ghost nun is excellent, but the whole film is ruined by too much jump scare, too much cheap jump scare. Also, on another note, I feel like the ghost nun is not as scary as she appears in the Conjuring series. Also, there's an infamous scene in The Nun where a bullet can hurt a ghost. Wow, that's new. That's new. Okay, if I have to say something that I love about this film is that I love at the end of the film, it ties back to the whole Conjuring universe. It ties back specifically to the beginning of the first Conjuring film. But nonetheless, it's bad, so I would give it like a 4.5 out of 10. Next film, The Grudge 3. Okay, the logic for this film is chaotic, especially towards the latter part of the film. The suspense tension is weak. The little boy Ghost Toshio is supposed to be a kid, but in this film, he's a middle school, teenage looking boy. What I'm trying to say is that he's so much taller, and when he squat down, it just looks weird. It looks ridiculously funny. 3.5 out of 10. Next one, Ritual. It's not scary, and the story is quite bland. So the whole film is about a man, he can finally defeat his own fear in front of a strong presence. The filmmakers can do a better job to make this film a whole lot more scarier. It's just the delivery is bad. It's a 3 out of 10. Next one, Lassen. Fuck Lassen. Lassen was released in 1998, which is the same year as Ringu. Same year, same date, which is odd. So supposedly Lassen was the sequel to Ringu, but after it's released, it got a ton of bad reviews. So the director decided to scrap this and make Ringu 2. Hence, we had Ringu 2 in 1999. So you might be wondering, what is it that is so bad in Last Sin? The main reason is, in Last Sin, they knocked down the curse setting with a scientific explanation. A scientific explanation. Okay? From that point on, the film becomes a horror, comedy, romantic, and sci-fi film. Well, I guess you can say it's iconic in its own, but iconic in a way that is a dumpster fire. I would say this film is terrible, but I would also recommend you to check it out just to see how bad it is. It's bad and funny at the same time. 3 out of 10. God, it's so bad. The director who made it doesn't even want to, recognize its presence. Next one, The Forest. Boring. It's about a girl who flew to Japan and went into the suicide forest to save her sister. And then some strange things happen. Like quite a lot of the bad horror films. You're gonna spend most of your time waiting for things to happen. 3 out of 10. Next one, Ju-on the Black Ghost. At the end, I get what they're trying to say, but for almost the entire time, I have no idea what the film is trying to tell us. Not in a good way. Like there are movies, they're trying to conceal some part of the story and then they will tell you at the end of the film. That is executed in a good way. But for this film, it just feels like, even though you understand what they're trying to say, but it's just bad. Also, the film is not scary at all. For a Ju-on series, especially a Ju-on series, I expected a whole lot more. 2 out of 10. Next one, Ju-on the White Ghost. It is just as terrible as Ju-on the Black Ghost. But this one feels a tiny bit scarier and funny as well. 2 out of 10. Next one, Ju-on the Beginning of the End. This is a Japanese remake of the original Ju-on series. They changed quite a lot of critical things here, such as the backstory of the curse of the house. Because I'm such a big fan of the original Ju-on the Grudge series, to me, I just have a hard time accepting all those new changes. So it's a 2 out of 10. Next one, Ju-on the Final Curse. I share the same hate as I have for Ju-on the Beginning of the End. So after watching Ju-on the Beginning of the End, you would have thought the story for the little boy ghost, Toshio, would have ended then and there. I'm gonna have to spoil a little bit here because it's critical to the review. Turns out that little boy lived as a human being for a while. Again, that is a very critical change to Ju-on the Grudge, the original series. It doesn't make sense. These two remakes intentionally make those confusing changes. I think they are just trying to stand out and not live in the shadows of the original series. But those changes are quite dumb. I get they make those changes to try to make the film to look more dramatic, but instead they look really messy. So it's a 2 out of 10. Next film, The House of the Devil. This one is a bad cult movie. The idea for this film is not bad. It's just that the filmmakers could have done a better job to execute this idea. When you watch this film, you're gonna spend majority of your time just waiting. You don't even know if you're waiting for things to happen. Like the scene she's waiting for pizza delivery. It's so long and unnecessary. And the climax for this film doesn't happen until the very end of the film. How horror movies, you will have tiny climax throughout the movie to keep you engaged with this film. But in this one, it's just they only have one at the end. The cult part doesn't even come up until the very, very end of this film. It's a 1 out of 10. Next one, A Wicked Ghost from 1999. Boring. It's more like a comedy than a horror film. The plot is about 4 young people who summoned the ghost and got haunted. A Wicked Ghost is a Hong Kong film which was released in 1999. To this day, it still has a good reputation in the horror film genre. Because of its reputation and its movie poster, it makes me think that this film, it's really scary. So for the longest time, I was so scared to watch this film. I have to ask people do you want to watch it with me? And one day I actually found someone to watch it with me. Turns out, it was disappointing. Okay, maybe back in the days, it was scary. But for now, I just feel it looks so dated. So I'm sorry, I have to call it a bluff. It's a 1 out of 10 for me. Next film, The Nun 2. 2. It's an unnecessary sequel which has nothing to add on top of the original story, and you can tell that they're making stuff up to continue the franchise. 1 out of 10. But I gotta say, like, the color grading is pretty good, you know, like, cinematography wise, but for viewers experience, like, story wise, wow, it's downright terrible. Next film, and this is the final film of this entire film review, The Disappointment Room. If there's a movie that has a pacing problem, bland storyline, boring character design, and a confusing ending, then it would be this film. You know, there are bad movies that I would recommend you to watch it because it's hilarious, like such as Last Scene, right? This one I would actually recommend you to not watch it. Just don't watch it because it's like the title. You know, it's disappointing. For some of the bad horror movies, you're gonna spend majority of your time waiting for things to happen. For this film, you're gonna spend majority of your time waiting for nothing to happen. So it's a 0 out of 10 for me. Thank you guys for watching this video. It's a long video. It's the longest videos that I've ever made. Please let me know in the comment section what horror movies are your favorite, because I always want to watch more horror movies, and if you can recommend some to me, that would be great. Thank you guys. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye. God, if I see a person standing in the underground storm drain, I'm gonna run. Let alone it's a scary ass clown. That doesn't creep you out? This is the problem with white people. Like, you need to leave the scene if you see a strange person, a clown, happens in nowhere. You just don't talk to a stranger, okay? Wow, they explain a curse with a virus. What? Well, they just massacred my girl Sadako. You know, she's powerful. But now you can just explain her power with the virus. Also, there's one scene just doesn't make sense. You know, Sadako crawled out of the TV and started making out with the main character. What? What are you doing? It deserves its reputation to be the worst in the franchise.